and welcome to Learning from Nature, the Biomimicry podcast with me, your host, Lily Ehrman. In my last episode, I mentioned that our next guest will be in the biophilic design space, but I decided to publish this episode first because my chat with this episode's guest will introduce an important resource that will set the stage for all future episodes. Today, we will be exploring AskNature.org, a really incredible tool for biomimicry. I will be joined by Andrew Howley, the chief editor of AskNature at the Biomimicry Institute. We will talk about all things AskNature, how to navigate the site, the ways in which this platform can be a resource for biomimics and educators and anyone interested in learning from nature strategies, exploring the companies that are already leading the way in biomimicry, and so much more. Andrew is your guide through the vast collection of materials on AskNature.org, commissioning and curating an ever-growing body of stories of life's adaptations and the innovations they inspire. For 11 years at the National Geographic Society, he connected audiences with explorers through websites, social media, and live-streamed interviews and events. He studied anthropology at the College of William and Mary in Virginia and sees an appreciation of our culture, history, and evolution as a powerful tool for helping humans to be positive contributors to our ecological community. This episode is packed full of great information and inspiration for your biomimicry journey, and I hope you enjoy listening just as much as I enjoyed chatting with our guest. Let's hop on in. Well, welcome, Andrew. I'll have you do a quick introduction and also please tell us your pronouns.
I'm Andrew Howley. I'm the chief editor of AskNature from the Biomimicry Institute. He, him.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And my first question for you, Andrew, is how did you get into this role at the Biomimicry Institute? Like, what's been your biomimicry journey?
Yeah. The short story is, just that a job came up at the Biomimicry Institute. It was exactly aligned with the kinds of things that I like to do, and I had multiple people in my life finding it and telling me about it. So
a sign.
But that kind of speaks to the fact that it's been really like a lifelong journey and engagement with this kind of material. And I think what I've always really loved is finding out, why things are the way they are, and what the origins are. And so that's taken a lot of things. I love archaeology, but then I love paleoanthropology, and it goes all the way back to the very foundations of biology and evolution. And in looking at the kind of branching history that we have, you see that all of these differences that we have in so many ways still all trace back to earlier shared things and the real, just undeniable sense that we are all one interconnected thing. And so biomimicry gives us that language and lens of looking at all of the other things with an air of understanding and saying, we're all in this together. There's things that we can learn from each other.
I love that description, especially because it is so foundational, but not always kind of at the forefront of education or the materials people see when they're first getting interested in biomimicry. But it is so true, and I think it becomes really apparent the deeper you dive and the more research you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, your role is AskNature editor. So my second question, and this bulk of the episode will be about this really incredible platform and tool called AskNature. So what is AskNature?
Well, AskNature is primarily and fundamentally an online tool. So it's asknature.org. And when you go there, you'll find three main things. It's a database of biological models, information about the way that living organisms work, and also of innovations that have been inspired by them. It also has educational resources for teachers who are wishing to teach biomimicry. And then it has essays and collections of those different pieces that draw out themes among them, contextualize them, and explore big ideas around nature and the part that humans play in it.
That's a great description. As somebody who's used AskNature for many years, I just want to emphasize how incredible this space is and how it's evolving and how it can play a really important role in somebody's biomimicry journey, which is why I'm so excited for you to join me today.
Thanks. It's really a wonderful project to be a part of, and in a very biomimetic way, it's got an inherited evolution and history that I get to be a part of through there, from how it started in 2006 and different iterations that it has had and different inputs that different people have had in it and making it what it is, and it itself builds on some of the existing knowledge in the world. We're not a team going out there and discovering new understanding of nature all that often. Mostly we're taking from what others have learned and published, whether it's through published scientific papers, or just through long inherited knowledge of the natural world and the way that it works. And that's a conversation between those two ways of knowing and exploring too. And so then, we build upon that, and then we see how people are using it, and we build upon the feedback from them, and it grows and it changes. And I'm really excited to be here at the point in its evolution that it is.
Yeah, totally. And for folks who are unfamiliar with it, maybe you can just give a little bit more context of who can use AskNature. What is AskNature? What's the function of AskNature, and who's it built for?
Yeah, well, nature is all about function, or AskNature.
Yeah.
AskNature is all about function, right? Yeah, I like to say that anyone can use AskNature, and everyone should use AskNature. It's a tool for anyone trying to solve a problem in a sustainable and life-friendly way, because that's the way that other living things function. And so we've put up these profiles that show how different things function and the different things that they accomplish, and made it all searchable and findable so that you can look to that to be inspired and apply that to whatever challenge you're facing or trying to solve. And because we take very detailed scientific knowledge and put it into a very universal language that anyone can understand, it also makes it a great tool for teaching biomimicry to students of all ages, because anyone can come to these pages and access the information that's there. And the information is what we're really interested in, the way that nature works, not so much the terminology that's used.
Right.
And so then that also makes it just a really enjoyable place to learn about nature. And we know that a lot of our traffic is people doing exactly that.
Right.
They're just coming to learn about and get closer to nature, which is one of the biggest goals of biomimicry, is just to reconnect us to the rest of nature, so that the things that humans are doing are in good balance with the rest of this world.
Exactly. And I can confirm 1,000% how incredible AskNature is for teaching all ages. And what you said about kind of translating the scientific literature that can be sometimes really heavy and hard to understand for the general public, for those not knee deep in the research, is so important, because that is a really important step in biomimicry, is understanding how the world works, but that can be a hurdle for so many. So I think that AskNature is a really cool tool, because they, people do provide a really great description and kind of break apart, function, why is it doing a certain strategy, which is, how they're accomplishing that. And that's, we'll get a little bit more into that, and then citing the literature. So the literature's there, and you can explore it and start to, understand it for yourself and practice that skill, which is, I think, important regardless. And I have my undergraduate students do that really early on, find scientific literature, read scientific literature, understand, the structure, look up words, kind of a good way to start exploring biology in a deeper manner, rather than just, the publicity or the media articles we see, is diving a little deeper into that. And AskNature is a really good first step in that path for so many. Yeah,
thanks. That's exactly the way that we conceive of it in a lot of ways. It's kind of takes this kind of multi-dimensional or multi-perspective approach, kind of a cubist thing, and saying, here is there's something out there that's part of nature, and that's really hard to, put words around. It's basically, it's something doing something, right? Here's a very simple way of understanding what's going on with it. And now if that's inspiring to you, and you've got new questions about some way that this can help you answer a very specific question, here's the fundamental research, all of the, things that you can go, and it's, research papers have contact information. You can always then just email the author of a paper and get really detailed, direct information about organisms and the way that they work.
Right.
And there's a million there's a million ways that any given strategy could be relevant to someone. So
exactly.
What we try to do is put it up there in the clearest, most direct, most easily understandable way possible, and give you the tools to then take it to the next level to address exactly what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And even when I was in grad school, I used, grad school for biomimicry, I used AskNature quite a bit. And it was a blessing and a curse in the sense that it was the start of many rabbit hole journeys into information that wasn't actually relevant to the assignment, but stuff that I was interested in. So thank you for that. But yeah. It's just like such a cool tool, and it's like a really great place to start. And then you just get hooked. You get, sucked in and interested in these really incredible and sometimes really weird strategies.
Yeah, I think, the way that you said that made me realize that's, maybe why I'm, pretty happy with everything.
Right.
That, my job is now to go down rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And that is what I do.
Not a bad job at all.
Yeah.
So we started talking about this, but I'd like to explain it a little bit more for folks who are just starting to use AskNature or haven't used it at all yet. How do you navigate AskNature? And then maybe speak a little to the biomimicry taxonomy.
Sure. Yeah. So the most direct way to use AskNature is to do exactly that. Just click on search from the top right of the page, and then ask nature your question in whatever way makes sense to you. Mm-hmm. Because we've got things tagged, and it's a smart algorithm, and it's able to find what you're getting at. Mm-hmm. And you'll see the search results auto-filter as you type, so you could even correct yourself and kind of tweak it there as you go.
Yeah.
When you see something that looks interesting then in this panel of cards about of search results, select it, and then you're off there. That's a particular biological strategy, or maybe it's an existing innovation that you can go into deeper, learn more about, see what is it that this organism is and does, and how is it relevant to you. And then once you've found one, from there you can jump off. So under the main image, there's tabs that can take you off to other strategies that either perform the same function or that come from the same organism. So then if you select either of those, it'll take you to a new page of search results. And now you'll see the navigation on the left that shows where those particular results fit in with these taxonomies that we use, which are either a living system taxonomy, which is basically the tree of life, so you can see if you're looking at bats, maybe you want to see more about bats or more about mammals or more about vertebrates or more about, as a whole, or the functional taxonomy, the biomimicry taxonomy that we've developed.
Yeah, and I think, and I was going to say, so begins the rabbit hole, right? And something that I think a lot of biomimics are really familiar with, but folks sometimes struggle with this concept early on, is function of, the why. So kind of finishing the sentence, how does nature blank? And I think AskNature is really great in the sense that it kind of prompts you to get there without even realizing you're getting there, which is a really incredible function of AskNature as well.
Yeah, you can always jump right into the navigation through those taxonomies, but that kind of is more useful once you've become really well versed with them.
Yeah.
And it's just using that search bar of just saying, well, how does nature whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And, and even just very broad, you can just say, like, I don't know, something about color.
Yeah.
It'll start giving you color stuff. Or you say something very specific, like, hydrophobicity in plants, and you'll get those results. But whatever it is, it helps you find it. And then there's the more structured taxonomies that can help you discover more.
Yeah, and just getting in there and starting to explore, I think, is really important. Like I have a lot of my students do that early on because we use AskNature throughout our entire class, right? It's a really great launching point. You mentioned in the scientific papers, okay, you understand some part of a strategy, or you get excited about how some organism creates color, for example. And then you can go down to the bottom of the page and, that's a launching point for 3 or 4 other scientific articles. And then at the bottom of those scientific articles, they cite a lot of other scientific articles. So you can kind of just keep going and get more and more answers to the question why, or the question how. How does this organism do that? Okay, but how?
So one of the other key aspects of AskNature is that it's taken all of these biological strategies, these things that living things do, and organized them by what we call the biomimicry taxonomy. And so that's just a system for organizing these according to what the strategy does for the organism or living system. It could be something that a whole ecosystem is doing even. It allows us to ask nature questions based on the tasks that we want to accomplish, and helps us to find the ways that other living things have met similar needs. And so that could just sound conceptual. So on a very practical level, it's about 30 generalized verbs with dozens of different contextualizers that go with them. So there's an overarching section of move. How does nature move? And then there's the details of on or through solids or liquids or gases, and all of these different things. How does it attach? How does nature find ways to attach to different things? How does nature, process signals, visual signals, auditory signals, things like that. So it's a way of looking at biological information from a very practical and design-oriented lens and perspective. So you can come in here not knowing anything about the organism that might give you inspiration, or even the way that biologists would talk about it, and just through that taxonomy say, well, I'm basically wondering, how does something adhere to a slick surface? And then you can find that because it's all organized and organized that way.
Yeah, and there's so many angles from which to approach using AskNature and really getting the most out of AskNature. One way, like you mentioned, Andrew, is to start looking up words and kind of explore that way. And the other way, now that we've kind of explained biomimicry taxonomy, you can search function. And, if you know that one organism has a really interesting mechanism or strategy for attachment, you can find 20 other organisms that have a really cool, mechanism or strategy for attachment. So I think that's a really interesting way to use AskNature and broaden our understanding of the natural world in a really cool way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the really exciting things that you realize as you get into biomimicry, and especially through the kind of visual sense of it that you get through AskNature, is that in a way there's only so many things that are happening, and it can kind of be organized into pretty tight categories. But then there are nearly infinite varieties of ways that those same functions are accomplished, even if they're very similar. They could be very different in their actual execution. Two different organisms that may seem to be performing the same kind of chemical processes might be using entirely different molecules and substances and proteins in order to bring it about. And so there's always something new to learn and to add to the variety of ways that life is accomplishing all that it does.
Yeah, and that's ultimately like a really beautiful part of biomimicry too, is just there's infinite solutions out there that already exist, that have been tested for sometimes millions of years, and it's just an incredible place to go down and to start building that curiosity, go down that rabbit hole. So yes, I love AskNature, and everyone else who's listening should love AskNature and start exploring AskNature.
Thank you. Yeah, really love it.
So on that note, one of my questions for you is just a little bit more personal. Like, what's one of your favorite tools or features for using AskNature?
For me, right now, it's kind of the beauty of the two taxonomy system that you can bounce back and forth. So I find that to be a really good tool for making the connections that are unexpected, because that seems to be where a lot of innovation and just smart ideas come from, is when you're able to come at things from unexpected angles. So say you're looking for something about, filtering water, and you end up on a page about baleen, and then you say, oh, okay, well, let me see more about whales. And then on looking more about whales, you see things that are about, kind of community and how they build their social relationships. So then you start looking into social relationships, and you see the ways that chimpanzees do social, but then you bounce from chimpanzees to tool use, and then you say, well, birds use tools too, and you keep finding all of these things, and now they can all start feeding into ideas that you have of each other, and and helping you to discover things that you wouldn't have thought to look for when you first set out on your journey.
Yeah,
I think that's the thing. It's a great kind of organized serendipity, and it really ends up enabling you to really have a conversation with nature. So you start by asking nature, but then as you bounce between the different ways that things are connected, it's really a conversation that you're able to have.
That's really powerful, and something that, as we start to build our biomimicry knowledge and get more interested and knowledgeable of how things work in nature, then we can take this information and inspiration out in the natural world when we're hiking or, walking with friends. And I think starting those conversations and, starting to collaborate and talk, even just like really informally, has really motivated me too. And I'm like known as Ranger Lily in a lot of my circles, because I don't know, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist. I know a little about a lot of organisms. And I think that's kind of a biomimic, point of view, where you're going out into the natural world and you're like, oh, this leaf can do this or that bird can do that. And it's like a lot of that information started on AskNature, and I kind of started to build up my repertoire through that tool.
That's great. Yeah. And it is, more than any particular piece of information that you draw out of AskNature, the real thing that we hope you're getting is that ability to see nature through this lens. So that, by learning the way that different leaves work, or the way that different, branching structures support different species of trees or whatnot, that just by learning a couple different examples, now you learn how to see that and how to interpret those clues when you go out into nature, so that you could, show up in an environment you've never been in before and know nothing about, but start to process it in a really helpful way, because you've learned to see things and think about what they're doing and not just how they look.
Right. Yeah, and that's a key distinction for biomimicry, is like more than just learning about an organism and, what their name is or its species name or what they do or how they live, but learning from an organism. And I think that's a really important distinction of, okay, we know about this organism, like what do they do? Why do they do that? And then what can we learn from them? And you also mentioned something important too, of like on a deeper level, biomimicry and AskNature, all these tools that are associated with biomimicry begin to ingrain in us a change in perspective and mindset, which I think is really important as we relate to the natural world, how we relate to each other and other species on this planet. And so on that note, how can AskNature, and what's the role of AskNature in creating a life-friendly future?
Yeah, that's really what it sets out to do. The simple idea that people often have when they first look into biomimicry is just, I'll make something the same shape as something that's in nature, right? And there's deep value to that, and lots of fascinating and very useful things. But the deeper level is again, not just a particular story of how nature has done something, but how does nature do things as a whole? And that's really what AskNature is made to do, and why the way it looks and reads the way that it does. We try to keep everything integrated with a sense of the organism as a whole and the ecosystem as a whole and life as a whole, right? That it's not just a storehouse of ideas that you're going to go in and grab and leave. It introduces you into a conversation with these organisms and a relationship with them. And that's how we build a life-friendly future, is to reflect on that idea that life creates conditions conducive to life. And so as we learn from any particular organism and the particular thing that they're doing, we see that it's all integrated into how that organism as a whole works and how that organism fits into its environment. And that's something that we try to convey in AskNature, both through the way that we write, that we bring in a lot of contextual information, some background, some reflections on those things. But also we lead each page with a big, beautiful photo of that living thing, you know, so that you're never just too abstracted from it, that you're always realizing that this is something that I'm learning about, a real living thing in a living environment. And that deep awareness of all of that interconnectedness is what helps us to create a life-friendly future.
Exactly. And something else that we talked about really early on, but I want to bring up again, is there's a whole section on AskNature, and you can search either by innovation or biological strategy. And there's a ton of really cool innovations in there that people can learn from and use as examples that have done biomimicry really well. more than just, like you mentioned, kind of taking information either just from like the form or shape of something and creating a design that's ultimately not life friendly, but companies that have really pushed past that and learned from the system or the process and then integrated it into a really life friendly design that benefits not just people but the planet.
Yeah, and I love the innovations because not only are they kind of like rallying cries that, hey, this is possible,
Right.
and inspiring in that way, but they're also very practical. If you came, wondering if there was a greener way to make concrete, well, yes, there are, and here are some of them,
Right, yeah.
So you found them, and now you don't actually have to do the biomimicry. Other people have, and you found it. And then there's going to be, second and third generation ideas that come out of those where people say, the way that somebody solved this problem actually gives me an idea about solving a completely different problem. And so that's one of the other things that we're excited about with AskNature is that every bit of information on there is the result of work of a lot of people, on our team and not, researchers in the field, people from sometime, centuries ago. But it creates this community of observers of nature and of innovators and doers and planners that can really all kind of get in contact pretty easily and start having really compelling conversations and relationships.
Exactly. And for me, ultimately, AskNature is a really hopeful space because of that. There's a lot of really incredible designs and innovations out there already that, aren't usually talked about or aren't published widely on media sometimes, but they're out there. People are doing this. They're practicing biomimicry. They're learning from nature, and there's so much to learn from. There's an endless source of inspiration in nature, and AskNature is a cool tool to start exploring that. So, a few last questions here. One of my favorite questions to ask everybody is kind of how did you first get interested in biomimicry? And along with that, like what made you fall in love with this practice?
There's kind of two things that I've realized in reflecting on, how I got interested in this and got involved in it. And one is that I always loved comparative anatomy, just like in art classes or biology or anything. It always amazed me and really engaged me to see that you can look at a bat wing and a human hand, and that's just so clearly the same stuff, right? But then it goes further. You can look at a horse's leg, which seems to be bent so crazily and so different, but you look at it bone by bone, and oh no, it makes sense now,
Yeah.
And so to see, I've loved to see the way that those different bones have morphed to perform the same general functions, but in such dramatically different ways. Like a leg is a leg, even if it's a fin of a fish, and it's not necessarily propelling it, but it's, it's grabbing things, it's moving, it's steering, it's directing. The amount of variety is related in so many ways to the shared experiences, and it just bounces back and forth between those. I find that so compelling, and it's a small step from that then to wondering, well, how can we apply these kinds of ways of iterating things and this idea from this species and put that in a new context, and how could that be useful for something else?
Yeah, totally. Such an interesting avenue to get excited about biomimicry. I feel like I haven't heard a lot of folks getting in it from that angle, so thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. The other way is, through the search and discovery of origins of things, like I was saying earlier, and it just, the way that it shows through all of the evolution of life on Earth, all of these differences, all, kind of trace back to a single starting point. And, depending on how heady you want to get about, how different an organism is and, how connected we are from one individual to another, if we're all part of an ecosystem, and how much of that is one living thing. But we're all, it's really one big thing that is happening, which is life on Earth, at least, right?
Yeah.
It's one big story, and we're all playing parts in it. And that realization just inspires a desire to see, well, what can we learn from each other, and how can we help each other? Because that's one of the real big goals, I think, of biomimicry is how do we go not just from saying that, humans should stop doing so much damage to how can humans be an agent for real productivity and assistance and and benefit to the rest of the living world.
Yeah.
And it's this approach that makes the most sense as to how we can get there. So,
I love that. That's a really good description. All right, last question. And one of my favorite to ask everyone, because I feel like we all have different approaches to this, but one of the most crucial aspects and, steps in biomimicry is our connection to nature. So what is your favorite way or favorite ways? What are your favorite ways to connect with and reconnect with nature?
Yeah, that's a great question. I see it as there's kind of a seeing side and a doing side. And so the seeing side is just through observation, just sitting and just taking it in, just being out in nature and seeing what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And especially I have a 3-year-old son now, and seeing the world through his eyes has been just so eye-opening again. And at the same time, it reawakens in you ways that you saw it when you were 3 years old, to whatever degree you remember that. But it really drew my attention from the macro of saying, like, wow, the biggest trees are so amazing and mountain ranges are so compelling, to then realizing that you can look at 3 square inches of a lawn and there's endless things to look at there. There's so many different species of grass or weeds there, and there's bugs and worms. And, and so seeing through his eyes has been really great. Just seeing the world at different scales and things. So that's the seeing side that really connects me with nature, and the other is doing. And so there, for me, I've been a runner forever, and I love it. And just getting out there and running, just moving through the environment, through my own self-powering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just the smells and the sights and the feel, that you run when it's hot, you run when it's cold, and you're not, you might take various precautions to keep yourself well prepared, but you're going to experience the elements there. And then just realizing that you're also you're putting your own evolutionary history to work. That, you just getting out there and moving is what these bodies are, made to do, in part. But, this is, it's feeling your bones move, feeling your muscles, and feeling your lungs and feeling your blood race. And you just get that real, you really get incarnated. You really become aware. We spend so much time detached from nature because of our attachment to abstracted things. We're writing or we're reading or we're looking at screens, and it's all conceptual. So it's easy to just stay in your head. So when you get out of your head and put your attention in the rest of your body, that just really drives it home and connects with this whole natural world that we're a part of.
Yeah, and I can attest to that too, carrying a heavy backpacking pack up a mountain. I always thank my legs, like, thank you, you're doing the hard work right now, my body is capable. And it's like the evolutionary, all the adaptations we have that are allowing us to do this. Yeah,
that's great, to be able to kind of step outside and thank yourself too. I'd be like, thank you, feet. Like, I can't believe what you just accomplished. And it lets you realize, kind of some of takes your head out of being the one in charge so much, because you realize so much of what we're doing, we have no idea of what we're doing.
Right.
It's just our body's doing it. Nature is doing what it's doing. Life is doing what it's doing. Mm-hmm. And we can, we do our best to understand it, and we learn new things every day. And that's always going to be the case, because what's going on is just so much bigger and wow.
Yeah. That's a good note to end on. I love that.
I was spacing out. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's so funny to go down these paths, because we could have a whole nother conversation on that. And I think it's just like so powerful, and it's just the start, there's the tip of the iceberg as far as like how we're connected to each other and this planet and the ecosystems and habitats in which we live and the organisms we share our planet with. So a good ending note. All right.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks a lot, Lily.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode, and special shout out to everyone who is subscribing, reviewing, rating, and sharing this podcast on social media. I appreciate you all so much, and just want to emphasize how much joy creating this is. Until next time, I hope you can go outside, begin to cultivate a curiosity about life around us, and even ask nature to jumpstart your own biomimicry.